Welcome back to Raptor-One.
Raptor-One, Voyagers of the Stars. Chapter 20, The Choir at War. A Reckoning in Minor Key. The message reached them as a tremor rather than a sound, a cord pulled taut until it frayed. Lyra felt it through the braid. Juno's sudden intake of breath, Kael's jaw locking down, before the comms finally found the note and translated it into something their ears could bear. Haven had decided. Not a plea this time. A muster. Threads of resonance unspooled across the last constellation. Fragments of choirs from broken cells. Lone carriers coaxed out of hiding. Captains who had once called themselves resonant and others who had never found a name at all. The call didn't ask for obedience. It named a place, a vector no map carried, a time measured in breaths, and the truth that if they did not stand now, they would stand later with fewer voices to count. Kael stared at the nav, there rallying in the shadow of an alliance grid. Bold. Desperate, Juno murmured, voice gone thin with listening. Her fingers hovered over the shard. She didn't touch it. There's a dampener hub there, bigger than the dreadnought we hit. If they switch it on across the sector, we'll be flying inside a coffin. Lyra let the yoke absorb the tremor in her hands. The silence core from the Alliance ship slept behind, shielding in the hold, a second heartbeat that never found their tempo. Then we're not watching from the cheap seats. Kael's quick glance held a question and, beneath it, the relief of a man whose battlefield had finally arranged itself into lines. So we fight. We join, Lyra said, quietly but without hedging, and we make the fight ours. The braid warmed, Juno's bright, fearful gratitude, Kael's grim assent, Lyra's hollow acknowledging, not resisting. The luminarium's work held. The lag was a breath short. The bleed came with consent, a controlled pour rather than a spill. Raptor-One turned into the lattice and flew. Edge of a quiet sea. The rally point lived between numbers. To an ordinary scope, it was a patch of space like any other, a field of dust and a wrong-angled moon. To carriers, it gleamed in slow pulses, a secret dock built from overlapping shadows where resonance could fold without drawing too many eyes. Ships slid in under veils and old tricks, patched resonant cutters, minor barges with choirs hammered into their frames. A sleek family of hulls the braid didn't recognize, eyes turned inward like monks hiding knives. Echo forgers came too, their glass guard bands broadcasting power like heat. Lyra felt Kael bristle at the sight and smoothed him down through the link without argument. They weren't here to police a tool we couldn't forbid. Mara arrived aboard a ship that sang like Haven had once sung. Too soft, too tired, but holding. She stepped onto the assembly platform with her chin high and her eyes older. A circle formed without anyone ordering it. The last constellation's threads lay on the periphery like a cathedral's scaffolding, beautiful and insufficient. Mara's voice reached them in two registers at once, air and bone. We stand because there is nowhere left to kneel. No applause, no roar. The choir's response was an intake of breath, that small, collective courage that makes a room braver than any single mouth. She continued, the Alliance has seeded a dampener lattice here. 6 emitters braided into a hub. When they light it, resonance will die in 3 systems. The autumn won't need to hunt us. They'll inherit the silence. We in that lattice now. A map shivered into being between ships, 6 bright points linked by faint filaments, a 7th at the center, a web pulled just tight enough to sing if you plucked it. Juno swayed. They tuned it on architect math. Mara didn't flinch. We give it back a better song. Lyra asked the question that mattered. What do you need? An anchor, a conduit, a tuner. Mara's gaze found them easily, and a shield for the opening note. Kael nodded toward their hold. We brought one. A ripple went through the circle as the word silence core crossed the braid. Curiosity, disgust, relief, fear. Mara's expression didn't change. You stole a blade from the throat that would have cut us. Good. We'll use it to keep our hands for a minute longer. Long enough to light the hub and break the braid, Lyra said. Long enough to make them choose which thing to save. Kael's mouth ticked, satisfaction without joy. He had always found comfort in a battlefield that forced an enemy to do math and blood. The choir that fights. They practiced, because song that doesn't rehearse dies under fire. Lyra learned the choreography in her bones. Carriers forming triads, anchor/conduit/tuner, until the whole assembly held like a net under a weight. Echo forgers claimed the role of cutters, point of the spear, dressed in resonance armor that made Kael deeply unhappy. The monkhulls revealed themselves as listeners by profession. They could carry tune across vacuum and return it, amplified and precise. On my count, Mara said, each triad will hold a note. We will not destroy. We will unbraid. Leave the metal. Break the pattern. When the hub goes out, those systems breathe. Breathe. Lyra tasted the word like a mouthful of water swallowed too fast. They split. 8 triads for 6 nodes and a spare. Mara's choir for the hub. Echo forgers for the escorts. Monkhulls for relay. Raptor-One would carry the silence core into the opening line and widen the window with the refraction veil. Juno's fingers trembled before the shard and then steadied. I can push his tuner if the braid holds. If it breaks. We cut and fly, Kael said, gently as he knew how. We've learned that part. Lyra pressed her palm to both their bands. The bond answered like a muscle ready to tear and choosing not to. We hold, she said, or we break on purpose. It was the closest thing she had to command. Approach to a killing web. The Alliance lattice hung over a hollow planet like a crown of straight lines set on a skull of sand. 6 emitters the size of cities floated in precise positions, hulls armored in legal threat and heavy metal. The hub sat inside a ring of escorts, a doctrine of deterrence, tidy and vicious. Raptor-One eased in from the dark beneath one of the lines. The refraction veil laid cool shade over their hull. The silence core slept and then woke with a soft, miserable hum that made the enamel of Lyra's teeth feel thin. She heard Kael suppress a retch and raise the veil a fraction higher. Juno's voice reached them through the braid, small and brave. I'm listening from the side, not into it, enough to see the gaps. Find us one, Kael said, eyes scanning a field of targets he wouldn't shoot yet. There, she breathed, and an empty opened in Lyra's head where the lattice's lines overlapped wrong. It wasn't a flaw. It was a tolerance, the space any machine leaves itself to expand. Lyra slid the ship into that breath and held, while 8 sets of triads drifted into their own positions, and the monkhulls sang the distances back into place. On my count, Mara said, steady as an old bell. 3, 2, strike. A note like a blade. The opening attack was a soundless, multi-angled strike of no. Raptor-One bled the silence core in a measured plume. The veil caught it and set it between ships like glass. Lyra felt her braid thin to a single wire and held. Juno fed the plume a counter pattern, not to widen it, but to give it shape a choir could follow. Mara's choir threw a high, braided cord at the hub. Each triad cut a different one of the 6 emitters, not through armor, but through math, turning a strand in the braid until its load went where it shouldn't. The lattice shuddered. Not much. Enough. Alliance escorts woke late and wrong. Their comms spat law in 4 languages and then failed in all of them. A dampener field tried to erupt and got turned inside out to protect the nodes it meant to silence, muffling their own weapons and leaving the choir untouched. Juno gasped. It's working. Kael didn't smile. Not yet. The second beat hit. Monk hulls mirrored the hub's own pulse back at it, delayed precisely enough to make the next cycle kick itself in the teeth. Echo Forgers took a line of escorts on the outer arc and chewed through armor with resonance blades that made Lyra's jaw ache. She thought of the price of each piece of glass hammered into a knife and punted the thought to later. Third, Mara called, and Lyra felt the count in her chest like a metronome. Raptor-One rolled. The veil thinned. The silence core sang more loudly of nothing. Kael threw the ship across a line at a speed that left the escorts aiming at where they had been. Juno held the exact width of the window with shaking hands and didn't let it close. The lattice braided for a moment into the right shape for collapse. Lyra threw her vow into the seam. I will make the call when the room goes quiet. And the seam opened a fraction wider without admitting the ocean. The hub faltered. The 6 nodes tried to feed it in perfect time and missed. The entire structure rang in a frequency nobody had intended to ring. Now, Mara said, very softly, and every triad cut the same place in 6 different ways. The lattice broke. Not with a boom, with a failure of confidence. A weapon that believed in its own math lost faith in the next line of its own equation. The emitters fell out of tune. The hub's inner ring dissynced. Across 3 systems, resonance breathed. It was not triumph. It was oxygen. The hidden cost. 2 beats later, the cost called itself by name. Juno had been holding the window, listening sideways into a field meant to erase her. When the grid failed, the field did not simply vanish. It inverted. For a heartbeat, Lyra felt every voice in the rally, every carrier, every choir, every Echo Forger's blade, every monk hull's careful relay, run through Juno's mind like a river through a narrow gate. Juno cried out. Not a word. A noise made when a body picks one pain to have, so it won't have to feel the rest. The braid dragged that pain along its stitches. Lyra tasted metal and springtime and grief. Kael swore without voice, a punch of refusal that didn't have a fist. Lyra cut the core. The veil slammed down. The lattice's collapse kept collapsing without them. Momentum did the rest. The hub spat a cloud of dead math and fell quiet. Escorts flickered, regrouped, and found their comms snarled by the thing they had built. Juno, Lyra said, uselessly, because sometimes the only word you have is a name. I'm here, Juno said, after a breath of 3 years. I heard too much. It's moving through. Kael forced air into his lungs, and then out again like he was learning to breathe in someone else's house. Status. Alive, Lyra said. Battered. Intact. Juno. Don't patch it, Juno whispered, catching the thought as it formed. Let it go through. We chose braid. Kael swallowed whatever argument he had and turned it into a target. 3 escorts trying to collect their doctrine from the floor. I can keep them busy if we need a longer goodbye. We don't, Mara's voice answered. Not on their ship, but across the whole corral. We leave. We've taken what we came for. Echo Forgers wanted to stay and cut until their arms remembered they were human. Monk hulls wanted to sing the enemy asleep. Carriers wanted to look a second too long at the shape of a victory that hadn't promised any. But Mara's steadiness held. The choir withdrew like a tide that understood rocks and saw them. Raptor-One slid out from under the broken line with less grace than Lyra preferred. Juno's breath evened by degrees. Kael let 2 escorts live because he didn't have the bullets to teach them all 10 lessons he'd written in his chest. For 1 long minute afterwards, H-Space hummed without deciding what it was. Then the red eyes opened. The red that learns. Autumn signatures did not tumble in from the edge of the map. They simply appeared, the way a fact appears in a mind that refuses to hold fiction. 1, then 3, then 9, arranged in a pattern Lyra did not want to learn to name. Certainty wave, Juno said dryly, and if there was a knock of laughter in it, it was because the alternative was to sob. They learned from the constellation. Kael checked the veil. It'll hold until they decide it won't. Mara's voice came low. All choirs scatter by prior threads. Do not drag them to each other. Sing if you must. Hide if you can. The autumn didn't aim for the hub the Alliance had built, broken, and lost. They aimed for the places the choir had stood. Not to shoot metal. To mark what it had learned. Here is where the song gathered. Here is what it sounds like when it breathes. Lyra's fingers trembled and steadied. The braid hummed. Kael's readiness to kill what needed killing. Juno's insistence that they remain what they had chosen. Lyra's vow carrying. Not command, not certainty, but the willingness to decide without making a throne. We fly, she said. Veil on. Guns cold unless they put a hand on us. We don't feed their math. We don't leave our dead behind. Kael blinked, almost smiled, didn't I? Juno's mouth shaped thank you and didn't need the air. They ran without looking like running. Under the lines where the constellation bent wakes, behind shards of old cities, through the shadow of a moon that had forgotten its name. The autumn's 9 became 6 became 4. Not because they chose to give up, but because certainty calculates that sometimes it is enough to watch and wait. Lyra felt the watching as a taste of coins on her tongue. Haven's measure. They regrouped in the breath between systems, where the veil hummed thickest. Mara's ship arrived with 2 scars it hadn't had, and 1 more song than Lyra had heard it sing before. The count came back, fewer than they'd started, more than a pessimist's math would have promised. Haven had chosen war and had not been erased by the first answer. The survivors built a circle again without orders. In that quiet, the cost laid itself out on the floor. The choir would wonder later if they had paid the right amount. There is no right amount. There is only the currency you can reach and the bill you must meet. Mara looked at Lyra across the space between ships. Not a summons, not a sentence, a question that had found its shape. We stood without you, she said, not unkindly. We can stand again, but the constellation won't light fast enough with our hands alone. Come back and bind with us, or keep your braid in the dark and light what you can reach. We will not chase. We will not kneel. Kael's answer lived in his posture. Juno's lived in her eyes. Lyra felt both in her wrist and wanted for a moment to be someone who didn't love 2 truths in a room that only had room for 1. Not yet, she said, because that had been the answer in the survivor ship and it was still true. We bought 3 systems of breath. We'll use it to light 3 lights. When they sing, we'll answer your call or ask you to answer ours. It was either arrogance or faith to talk like that. Maybe both. The bond didn't let her be only one. Mara inclined her head, a queen admitting a subject whose kingdom fell on a different map. Then fly, and be ready for what follows. The autumn won't simply chase where we call. They will build a place where calling dies. Juno swallowed. A gate. Mara's eyes were very tired. They've started it. On the edge of the next dark. Silence moved through the circle like weather. Kael's fingers flexed on nothing. Lyra felt the luminarium's braid tighten around their wrists, as if the glass remembered something the architects hadn't survived and wanted very much for someone new to. Counterpoint. They parted like lines in a fugue. Monk holes fell into long shadows to carry messages farther than a voice can run. Echo forgers brought their knives home to hammers. Choirs that had never shared a song before traded a bar and a half and went different ways. Raptor-One turned its nose toward the left-hand arc Juno had already chosen, a dim radiant that asked for a promise of refusal before it let you inside. The veil hummed. The silence core sulked in its shell. Haven's cord thinned and held. Kael worked in calm fury, rebuilding a stabilizer he could have coaxed into another hour. Juno slept without sleeping, eyes moving under lids. Lyra kept her hands loose and light and let her vow do its work. When the room went quiet, she made the call, and because they had braided, the call passed through them, not over. They did not speak for a long time. When they finally did, it was to name what the hidden cost had been. Juno? Kael asked, without his usual armor. She nodded, eyes on the pocket where the shard slept. It went through. Some of it stayed. I can hear the edges of other choirs now. Not enough to steer by. Enough to know they are. Kael grunted a wordless acceptance. Then, after a breath, if it gets too loud. I tell you, she said, and meant it. Lyra let the ship hum. The autumn signatures didn't appear. They simply existed in the math beyond her map. The Alliance would rebuild its hub with better guards and fewer flaws. Haven would harden or crack. The Echo Forgers would spend shards like heat in winter and call it prudence because sometimes it is. The last constellation waited, patient and implacable. Next light, Lyra said. Next promise, Juno answered. Next fight, Kael added. The braid held. Coda, a red horizon. Hours later, as they threaded under a line that glittered like a thought-catching light, the scope drew a curve on nothing. Not red, not blue, not anything a scope should draw. The same dark hull they had seen near the luminarium winked in and out, measuring, not chasing. A thin ripple ran through the constellation, cold as a knife laid against a pulse. Juno flinched. They're building somewhere we don't have a word for. Lyra didn't look away. We'll invent one. Kael snorted, and then we'll break it. They flew on, long and slow, toward a radiant that wanted a refusal before a vow, while behind them an idea with red eyes began to close its hand around the place where songs cross a threshold.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to be notified about upcoming releases to the Raptor-One series, please subscribe. This has been a Bad Karma Drone production.